All right, guys, I got a bit of a surprise video I wasn't expecting to do. But today's video and plant of focus is peanuts. I did not realize that I had one this large in here to do a video with. So I'm going to go with it. And we're going to start with the cons like I normally do. And then we'll work our way up to the pros. So really, in all fairness, there's not too many cons to this plant. It's more of planting it to get it to grow right. Now, I did not plant these in rows, which is what you would normally want to do. You want to mound some dirt up because you're planting for seed production. I'm not planting for seed production, I'm doing deer. So all I did was broadcast them across the top and till them in about 1 inch deep. Peanuts need to be buried 1 to 2 inches deep. 2 maximum, 1 toward the minimum to help these seeds really germinate. So be careful. If you're kind of a stickler about how things are planted, you might want to just set them in rows, and you can put some other companion plant with them if you want, but it depends on your planting strategies, what you do. It can be viewed as a con in some cases, but I just did the most simple method and throw it out on the ground and then bury it somewhat. Another con is if you're looking for big time tonnage, say like like what these deer vetch plants produce. These guys can get up to maybe 7 feet tall or so, and you're talking more than 10,000 pounds per acre out of those. These guys aren't going to do that. This plant is a low growing, it kind of spreads out. So I would say your average peanut is about 3 feet wide. Now this is one plant, can grow up to 3 feet wide and roughly 2 feet tall. You might see them grow a little taller than that, but that's about your average dimensions for these peanut plants. And there are other varieties. So if you want the larger nut ones, I think this is the Virginia variety, and this one gets you the larger peanuts. So pick your varieties right, depending on what you want. For me, I'm just focused on deer. But one of the issues that I've run into is this plant is slow growing to get going. I even stuck it in here with deer vetch, which is also slow to get going. And not one time did I find a peanut plant in here until I took the mower and cut everything back. And then there they were bushing back out. So they couldn't really keep up with the deer vetch. So keep that in mind. You might want to put these plants in open spaces to give them room to really do what they need to do. Now, if you're a guy that doesn't like, well, let me save that for later. But this is definitely one of the issues with peanuts, is the fact that it just doesn't get very tall. Not a lot of tonnage can go with these. They will sucker back, but they're not like high volume of tonnage compared to some of the other plants. They do pretty decent. If you had a real healthy stand on peanuts, you could probably get a couple thousand pounds per acre, maybe 2,500 pounds per acre, depending on, like in this case, how thick or big the plant gets. Obviously, we've reached what we consider to be, at minimum, the average size for these plants, and it's still growing. So that's a good thing when it comes to longevity, but I'll talk more about that here in a minute. Root wise, these plants need a lot of moisture. So if you have soil that is in low organic matter, you'll probably see these peanuts will not do very well. Soil moisture for these is a must. And the fact that I've actually got a peanut plant this large right now tells me that the organic matter in this soil is now high enough to maintain some peanut plants. They also need room to grow. Like I kind of stated earlier here, if you don't give them the room or the space, they can have problems, and I'll give you an example of that. So this one here kind of got the lucky draw, and it was planted on the edge of the screen wall and had more sunlight for access. You move just a little bit further back in here where it got dark, and you see how the weeds are dead around here from no light. Look how small that other peanut plant is. It is so tiny. So we have low nutrient output, lower protein output because the plants are shaded. So keep that in mind. If you're planting peanuts, you need more direct sunlight for these guys to do better. I would say the worst case scenario is partial shade, but you still want a few hours of direct light hitting them at the minimum. All right, let's talk about the roots a little bit more here. The roots tend to go fairly deep. Not as deep as some of the other plants, but when they're searching for moisture and nutrients, those roots will travel looking for that to maintain this plant. So you figure the root radius is probably a little bit bigger than this plant is itself. So if it's 3 feet wide and 2 feet tall, that's roughly, it could be a little bigger than that, is your root radius. The only drawback is here, yes, these are legumes, and they are not perennials. These are more classified as annuals, because frost shows up, these guys are dead. So if you're looking for something year-round, these peanuts will not provide it. Now, I'm going to move into the cons, if I remember, or the pros, I'm sorry. If I remember a couple other cons here, I'll add that in as I'm doing the pros. But on the pro side of things, these plants don't grow very tall. So this is an opinion option right here. If you want shorter plants because you don't like deer hiding in jungles like this per se, then these are the perfect plants to put out. If they're not getting more than 2 feet tall, say 2.5 at its highest, that is right in the eating zone for deer. The attraction level on these is high. I would say it's a step probably below clover, maybe 2 steps below clover if you're using that as a basis of attraction. Because the problem I run into out here, I found no browse on the peanuts, and the deer just wasn't in here browsing. They wasn't reaching down past this vetch to get to those peanuts. So if you're looking for browse, that might be an issue if you're planting it with other plants. Usually, if you want to help this plant something that's also short growing, say clover, to boost the nitrogen. And yes, this one does have nitrogen fixing ability. However, it is on the lower end of the scale. So this is a pro-con if you're looking for a certain qualification for nitrogen. This one does about 30 to 50 pounds maximum per acre. All right. In all reality, if you're looking at those numbers, that's not a lot. So if you're putting 30 to 50 pounds out, it's not really going to show a difference in these big plants. You might see a slightly darker shade of green, but that's about all you're going to get. And then the other plants that you would see that are affected more would be the smaller growing plants. So let's say you got buckwheat in here, and you put buckwheat with this, which is also another good companion crop. You can feed the buckwheat just enough to kind of edge that stuff to get a little bit bigger. So 30 to 50 pounds, if you're suffering for nitrogen, is a drop in the bucket in what you need. But it is at least a drop in the bucket. Now, speed of growth. It is slow to get going initially, but it does get faster as the plant gets older. So it might take 3 or 4 weeks in some cases, depending on what companion crops or what the surrounding situation is, to get something of decent size. Just be aware of that if you're trying to plant peanuts. And yes, there are other versions than this peanut plant, which could grow a little faster. They might grow a little slower, or even smaller than this peanut plant. So just be aware, the variety version you pick can affect your outcome. These guys are excellent bulldozers in your soil. And it's not, I mean, the roots do a pretty good job, don't get me wrong, but when it's ready to produce, it literally shoves peanuts down into the soil. So if you have hard soil, this thing creates, I don't know if I can find some on here or not, super hard stems, and they just keep elongating until it self-buries the peanut. And that can go from a few inches deep to a foot deep or more, depending on how soft your soil is. And I'm not seeing one right off the bat here. You would have thought this plant would at least produced one or two by now, and it's not done it yet. So just be aware of that. And peanuts may have a hard time growing in colder climates, so you can be zone restricted in the amount of time need for development. So these guys need a little bit of time to develop if you're looking for seed. So that's a pro-con depending on your opinion on that. But you can see here this plant has done a really good job with the conditions it's put in and what I know this soil is. Even though it is getting better, it still has done an absolutely fantastic job. So these plants can grow pretty well in poor soils. However, you will sacrifice nutrients, size, and protein production. So that's going to lead me into the next thing. What kind of protein do we get out of these leaves right here? That's what a lot of people want to know when it comes to growing antlers. So keep your 16% as your minimum standard for growing giant bucks. Right, we want to go above, anything above 16, I consider that icing on the cake. And that helps grow the extra large racks that we're looking for. So this guy can produce in healthy soil 20 to 25% protein, which is an outstanding number to grow the bigger deer. So there's not really a shortage of protein. And yeah, there's other plants I've got in here that can produce in the mid 30s or upper 30s, and even a couple in here that can produce in the low 40s. So it's kind of a middle to slightly upper end plant when it comes to protein production. However, this is another kicker to this plant. There is a second level of protein to this plant. It does produce a very, very nutritious grain, and it can produce a lot of them per plant. That's good. If you want these to reseed, they can do it themselves if you leave them alone. But let's get into the seed itself. Protein, or peanuts and protein. What kind of numbers are we looking at compared to, let's say, the greenery here? So what turns out is the peanut itself is actually even higher protein content than the leaves themselves. So peanuts can actually reach up to anywhere from 34 to 36% protein. That depends on health of the soil, how much room the roots have had to grow. You know, there's a lot of factors that can change your protein levels, but you can get something that high. If you can't, and your soil's, you know, a little bit worse or really bad soil, if you got real bad soil, cut the protein number in half. Pretty decent soil, do about 2/3 to 3/4. And that would give you about a pretty good average of what you're pulling for the peanut itself. The nut is highly nutritious. That is a fantastic supplement feed that you can add for deer to eat. It has a excellent fat building ability. Also, with the high protein, you're building muscle throughout the winter. So for states where it's legal to feed year round, this plant can provide food year round if you harvest the peanuts. That's only if you do that. So if you want to save money by growing your own food for the deer, you can do that with these plants, and then feed them even higher protein in the winter when they need it the most, when they're exerting so much energy during the rut. So this plant has a dual purpose. It can produce pretty good protein in the spring and summer, and then excellent to outstanding protein in the grain it produces. So keep that in mind if you're looking for another option out of these plants. Also, another great thing about these is, let's say deer come in and browse these peanut plants. What's going to happen to them if they're browsed? Well, the good thing is they can come in here, cut this off here, or browse it off here, and it'll sucker back from one of these other locations. So these plants do a pretty darn good job of regenerating growth if you need it to be so. However, if you have a lot of deer population, it can be difficult for plants like this to recover if it keeps getting scalped off repeatedly. So it's not as good of a browse plant, say like this deer vetch right here is. This stuff is outstanding browse tolerance. This is more middle to upper end of the road type plants, but they do have a fantastic purpose. Like I say, anything I can do to improve my soil, these plants will put out enough nitrogen to do that. Also, these plants will decay fast. So if you're looking for that organic buildup in your soil, these plants can produce a pretty good amount of organic matter under the soil and on top of the soil. And that will be a quicker release of nutrients, which could help, say, your fall blends that you put out. Or maybe you're doing a crop rotation in the middle of spring and summer, and you could till this up, mow it down, chop it up, whatever, disc it, and that can rot real quick and provide ample nutrients to other plants. Also, it will, because it is a legume, it will feed other plants while it's living. And then when the roots die, you'll have a lot of earthworms in here devouring whatever microbes attached to it, and the roots themselves when they're rotting. So anything that breaks down, it will draw worms in. And they should leave the peanuts alone unless they too have rotted out, and they'll just consume whatever. So there you go, guys. That is peanuts. I think as far as the purpose in a food plot, they can be a surprisingly good plant. They will draw deer in. They do produce multiple levels of protein, either through the greenery or the peanut itself. They reproduce at a very high rate. So if that's all check marks to you, then this is a plant that I would look at as adding to your food plot mixes. And I think this is a great plant to keep experimenting with. I probably will put out more peanuts in other places because I am expanding the farm as far as how I'm redoing this for deer. And I'll see what happens as I scatter them out in new places. So there you go, guys. The pros and cons of peanuts. Great plants to have, but make sure you got the water to keep them going. Otherwise, their drought tolerance is not that great. You have a good one.